Over the last couple of weeks here in the United Kingdom, talk has been rife of an impending World War III. And to be honest, it's quite frightening. But it's in far contrast to the story we are about to tell. And that is the story of a young boy who couldn't wait to serve his country. This, my friends, is the tragic tale of Jack Banks.
Back to me. Days are all too long. Come back to me. You never should have gone. I was so young and full of pride, and you were wild and strong. I never knew how weak I was. I watched them gather round him.
Now, throughout history, there are tales of courage that you could say transcend the ages. The stories of ordinary individuals that are thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And today we're here in Darwen Cemetery, yet again, to tell the story of a remarkable young boy by the name of Jack Banks. Jack Banks was 15 years old when he would leave home to go and serve his country. And he had lived at nearby, and I think it was Redcliffe or Radcliffe Street, and I'll put the name down below as well as an overlay. Now, he'd grown up listening to stories, tales of adventure by his grandfather, and I would presume these were tales of what had occurred during World War I. But these stories ignited a keen interest in young Jack, and he couldn't wait to leave home, like I said, to serve his country, to go and fight and to protect his country. It was late 1942, and the world was by now gripped by the chaos of war. And in this quiet town of Darwen, the determined Jack Banks, he would make a life-altering decision. And it was driven by a sense of duty. And like I said, having been mesmerised by these tales by his grandfather, Jack would finally leave home to join the Durham Light Infantry. Now, his parents, Jack and Fanny, they were both upset that their young son was going to serve in the military. But they thought he was just joining up to train. After all, he was 15 years old. But they actually said to Jack that if he was ever asked to go an actual fight, to actually leave the country, to fight for his country, then they would stop it. They would inform the authorities, the War Office, that their son was only 15. Now, we have to bear in mind that a lot of young soldiers lied about their ages because they wanted to serve the country so badly, and Jack was no different. But his parents, Fanny and Jack Sr., both said that if they found out that he was drafted to go overseas, they would inform the authorities and they would put a stop to that happening.
In this third section of the newsreel record of our invasion, these further graphic pictures show the consolidation of the beachhead positions and the thrust inland. The weather was none too good, but the little ships plugged on manfully to the beaches, bringing enormous support in manpower and weapons, and bringing also the mechanical needs of our Army and Air Force, the means to build our first airfields in France since 1940.
It was actually 6th of June 1944, and at around 11:30 in the morning, when Jack and the rest of his comrades, the rest of his troops, would actually set foot on Normandy beach. He would face many encounters. I mean, one can imagine, can't you, that Normandy beach itself, with all the gunfire being targeted by the snipers on the beach itself, as well as the actual cliff sides. It must have been a frightening prospect, jumping off those boats and to trying to get through the waters to safety on the beach. Now, Jack survived all that, but the horrors that he must have witnessed, we can only imagine. But after setting foot on Normandy beach, like I said, on the 6th of June, Jack would encounter many hostilities. He would have to face gunfire, mortar shells. He would have to face the death and destruction of people who he had trained with. But this would only last for 6 weeks, until Jack and a group of soldiers would encounter enemy fire when closing in on a small village in France.
I will wash the bloody hands and cast the bowl away. And as the years hang on me, you will always be young. And one day I will lie down where the rose was blown.
So 6 weeks later, on the 27th of July 1944, Jack's battalion, they'd crossed a road the south of Hotolibag, and I'll put the name down below. And this was a small community in the Normandy region of northern western France. But it quickly became apparent to Jack and a group of soldiers that German soldiers were holed up in a farmhouse. Now Jack was accompanied by Lieutenant S.C. Rood, who was his section leader, Sergeant Warman, and 2 other comrades. And these 5 souls all volunteered to storm this farmhouse because it was basically blocking their advancements, or the troops' advancements, further north. But as soon as they encountered the hostilities of these German soldiers, they noticed that the farmhouse was heavily fortified by a machine gun post. Now, reaching the foot of a mound and taking on severe gun fire, or bullets zipping past them, Jack and the 4 other young men, they took cover down in a mound. And Jack himself pulled a 36mm MK1 grenade, and he pulled the pin and he threw it over. Now this kind of caused enough confusion and gave these young boys time to regroup, and they scurried over towards, and I think it was some kind of pit, but from there they weren't that far away from some houses nearby. I think these houses were something like 200 yards away from where they were now camped up. Now these houses, Jack and his comrades all thought these were where the Germans had scurried into, and after a short wait, and obviously with no more gunfire being apparent, Jack, and like I said, the rest of his comrades, they stormed these houses, but there were no Germans around. Now these Germans had scampered during, obviously, Jack throwing their grenade and taking on gunfire themselves. Now, thinking all was clear and the job was quickly done, Lieutenant Rood and Sergeant Warman, they gave the order to start to retreat back to base. And in doing so, I think it was Lieutenant Rood himself who noticed a small group of Germans scampering down a roadway, and I think they were heading towards some kind of orchard. And it was at this moment that a hail of shells came over, and it literally took out this small group of soldiers, Jack, his 2 comrades, Lieutenant Rood and Sergeant Warman. Now Lieutenant Rood himself, he received a serious injury to his right temple. He was bleeding profusely, but he still carried on. He looked around and he saw young Jack lying on the road, and he had taken a hit to his upper right hip. As for the 2 other young soldiers, and I don't have the names unfortunately for those 2 young boys, but they were clearly dead in the roadway. Sergeant Warman himself, I don't think he had taken on any injuries. Now Lieutenant Rood and Sergeant Warman went to Jack's aid, and they quickly bandaged up the wound to Jack's hip. I don't know what had gone on with the German soldiers and the artillery fire that they'd sent over in the first instance to kill 2 of Jack's comrades and to wound Lieutenant Wood and obviously Jack. But Lieutenant Rood himself knew that they couldn't stay in that vicinity for much longer because it was just too dangerous. So he scampered off to get help, and he went towards the base camp of where his battalion was staying, and he came back with, when I say ambulance, it was more of a stretcher bearers I think they were, that came to Jack's aid, and they quickly patched up Jack as best they could, where they would then take him to an awaiting field ambulance. Now Jack didn't appear to have any pain, but he, like I said, he did seem to have been hit at the top of the right hip. And he turned round to Lieutenant Rood and said, "I've had it, sir, I'm finished." To which Rood replied in some form of text, but basically told Jack not to be silly. Now when Lieutenant Rood arrived back with help and the stretcher bearers, Lieutenant Rood asked Jack how he was now feeling, to which Jack replied, "All right, sir." Now unfortunately for Jack and Lieutenant Rood, this will be the very last conversation that the two would have between each other. Now, the last conversation, like I said, that Jack and Lieutenant Rood had together was after being asked how he was now feeling, and Jack saying, "I'm all right, sir." Jack sadly passed away from the injuries whilst heading towards, or being in, the field ambulance. His injuries were far worse than what anybody imagined. What was thought to be nothing but superficial wounds had turned out to be a lot more serious. Jack sadly died, I would presume, from shock from loss of blood. And those, like I said, were the last words that Lieutenant Rood and Jack said to one another. Now, his parents, Fanny and Jack Sr., soon received word back, whilst they were at work from all accounts, that their son had been killed whilst in action. They were distraught, as one can imagine. I mean, I just don't know what goes through a parent's mind when they hear the news that their son has died while serving the country. But this news turned to shock and disbelief several days later, when they would receive another letter from the War Office, this time saying that they got it wrong and Jack indeed had suffered just a wound. He was injured whilst in combat. So their hopes were kind of risen that their son was soon to be coming back home. But then a third letter came, and this time it came from the Padre who had looked after Jack during his final moments. And this letter only came because Jack Sr. wrote to the War Office, and I think the letter was then sent off to the Padre, because he wanted confirmation, wanted clarification on what indeed had happened to their son. And this third letter came back stating that their son had indeed passed away from the wounds sustained while storming that farmhouse. You can imagine the shock, you can imagine the anger in both parents at this point, mixing and playing about with emotions. It must have been absolutely horrendous for them. Now here at Darwen Cemetery, Jack's body isn't interred here. His body would later be interred at Jerusalem Cemetery over in France. And it's one of the smallest Commonwealth war graves, I think, anywhere. And I think there's 46 or 47 graves split over 3 sectors, and I'll put photographs over. So obviously we're not going to visit Jack's grave as much as I really want to. We do have photographs of his grave, and I'll put links down below, and a thank you to the websites we've used to find this information. But yeah, I mean, we would love to visit and pay our respects properly, but obviously France, different country, it's difficult at this moment to do. So we're here in Darwen Cemetery because they do have memorials to Darwen's war dead or to the soldiers, and we're hoping to find Jack's name on this memorial. It is a tragic story, it's a tragic tale, and it's one that we wanted to tell because of what's currently going on in the world right now, and how apt it is that this young boy showed no fear when signing up, when training, when going out to fight over in France. One of the first to volunteer to storm this farmhouse, along with two of his friends, and obviously the lieutenant and sergeant. True courage, true bravery, and I doubt that many of today's teenagers would offer to do exactly what Jack did back in 1944. Now I say that about today's youth because we are a different generation, we're a different breed. We've grown up in what I would class as peace in our time, in an era where wars did take place, but they're nowhere near as obviously as big as a world war, you know, and out of sight, out of mind attitude, isn't it? Well, it doesn't affect us, I don't have to worry about it. But there is a different breed of society nowadays, and wars are completely different as well. You know, the technology used in today's fighting is nothing like what it was back in the First and Second World War. And I know this is going to sound a bit harsh, but if somebody was badly injured and passed away during those wars, quite often the bodies were returned home and they were placed in war graves, and Darwen Cemetery has many war graves to honour the dead. Whereas now, if somebody gets killed in a war, on the battlefront scenes, I highly doubt many of these poor souls will be returning home, because, and again, I don't want this to sound too harsh, but there would be hardly anything left of these poor soldiers if they get killed. Such is the power of the shells, the guns, the mortars. Advancements in technology in wartime is completely different. So there is a completely different mindset and mentality towards signing up and fighting for your country. But like I said, back in 1944, Jack could not wait to leave Darwen to go and serve the actual country that he was born and brought up in, and one that he respected highly back in the day. Now here, just behind me, are the names of many of the Darwen heroes. And we are going to try and find Jack Banks' name somewhere around here and around Darwen Cemetery itself. Now, looking at these plaques and these signs, it looks like these are the actual soldiers, the brave souls that lost their lives during the wars, and which section of the cemetery they are interred in. So Jack Banks himself won't actually be on these ones, because like I said, these are war memorials themselves. And you've got one here about the Spanish flu, 1918-19. You've got some information about actually the uniform and armoury that they used and wore. Prisoners of war. Conditions in the trenches. And obviously after the Great War ended. So this is obviously all about the First World War. So we're actually at the wrong side, but it's still nice to see, and to see the respect that these souls have been paid. So we'll carry on looking for anything to tie this story up of Jack Banks. Now, whilst we've realised that this is a tribute and a remembrance of those who died in wartime, it seems to be the Great War, the First World War, that they've concentrated on here at Darwen Cemetery. And as you can see, over 9,000 Darweners went to war, and over 1,300 did not return. 70 are buried in this cemetery, which are these names, as we've touched upon. However, and for me quite strangely, we can't find anything on those who fought in World War II and anything to do with Jack Banks. And I have to say, I'm quite shocked and a little bit disappointed in this, because Jack Banks' story is one of true heroism. I mean, we talk about heroes, and I've mentioned it on a few other videos in the past, about how we use the word hero so easily, so casually. But when we talk about young boys at the age of 15 signing up to fight for his country, who had only just turned 16 when he sadly lost his life in doing so, that is a hero. That is somebody who should be honoured, quite rightly, along with all the other soldiers, just like the World War I soldiers and names on these plaques, billboards, are being remembered. So perhaps something is coming in the future here at Darwen Cemetery to respect all those who died in World War II. And if anybody from the Friends of Darwen Cemetery or the local community, which it says on this bench shows, if any of these people can comment down below, if anybody knows, comment down below, tell us if something is coming to remember those from World War II, because I think it needs to be done, and especially in Jack's story, that needs to be told. Because I am quite shocked that at the moment we've not found anything here in Darwen Cemetery to remember those poor soldiers. It was Lieutenant Rood himself who would clarify exactly what happened during the advancement and the engagement with the German soldiers at this farmhouse. He had read in local newspapers that the Banks family had received several or 2 letters of miscommunication in regards to their son Jack, and he wanted to put the record straight, so he actually wrote directly to Fanny and Jack Sr. explaining and detailing, like I said, exactly what happened on the day of their son's death. He would also tell the parents of how proud he was, how amazed he was at the bravery of young Jack. But he was also mentioned in a light-hearted way how Jack had hidden his age from all his comrades, from all the officers, the lieutenants, the sergeants. Nobody knew that he was only 15 years old when he signed on, and he kept it to himself up right until his death. And it was only after he died, and obviously the communication between the War Office and the parents was getting misconstrued, it was only then that Jack's real age came out. And Lieutenant Rood, like I said, in the letters to the family, like I said, he would actually tell them that nobody knew. Nobody knew. He was only 15 and 16, obviously, when he died. But again, it just shows the courage, the bravery from this young boy. But Lieutenant Rood and these letters, he detailed, as we've said in this story, exactly what went on, how it all transpired and how Jack lost his life. And we've got overlays of those letters, which you probably would have seen anyway whilst I'm talking in this segment. But it's quite a detailed letter, but it's one that's heartfelt. It's one that obviously shows a lot of sorrow and amazement to the courage of young Jack Banks. Now, when we first set out over to Darwen Cemetery, I was convinced that these memorials and remembrance plaques to the war dead were for both wars, World War I and World War II. So I expected to see Jack Banks' name somewhere on those plaques, but I'm a little bit disappointed. Well, I'm extremely disappointed that he is not being remembered anywhere, as far as I know, anywhere here in the cemetery. It's a shame, it really is, because I was so convinced his name would have been on one of them plaques. But throughout the story, we will have shown his headstone over at the Jerusalem Cemetery, like I said, over in France, and that is where Jack is interred. But it is such a tragic tale. Now, if you did enjoy this story today, and you know the story of Jack Banks, comment down below and tell us what your thoughts are. Tell us what your thoughts are on how a 15-year-old had the guts, had the bravery to go out and serve his country. He couldn't wait to go out and fight. It's a strange one, because his parents, the last thing they said to Jack was, if we find out you are actually leaving the country, we will stop you. We will tell the War Office that you're only 15, not 18. But somehow that slipped through the network, didn't it? And obviously they never got a chance to contact the War Office. It was too late when they did. He'd already left these shores. But to actually land on Gold Beach, Normandy, the D-Day landings, survive that initial onslaught of bullets and mortar shells, to then spend up to 6 weeks walking through narrow lanes, fields, countryside, facing hostilities from German troops. 6 weeks into that D-Day landing, he sadly lost his life at the age of 16. With Jack being interred at Jerusalem Cemetery and his parents obviously suffering badly with grief, they chose an inscription for his headstone which simply says, "God will tell us why someday he broke our hearts and took you away." Here at Darwen Cemetery, on these trees, children from an obviously nearby school have been putting drawings of poppies attached to the actual leaves themselves with messages on the back. Some of them are difficult to read, but RAF, Army, there is something wrote on the back. Let's have a look at this one. "Dear Lord, thank you to all the soldiers who have passed away for us. Amen." That's this one, sir. And that's the same. Dear God, thank you for the soldiers that fought in war. Amen. I mean, that's a nice little tribute. And there's some more just over here past this side. So at least the children of today are respecting and honouring the dead. This is quite a long one. "Dear God, please look after all those that gave their lives for us during the war and help those..." What's that say? I'm not sure what that says. "Help those that are still at war. Amen." And finally, we'll do this one. "Dear God, please look after the people in hostel that are hurt. Amen." Hurt, H-E-R-T. But still, it's respectful, and that's what it's all about. Now, I guess a lot of people will be saying, well, how did Jack Banks manage to convince people of his age, and how was he allowed to actually get on those planes, those boats or whatever to get to Normandy? Well, let's be honest, a strong-willed young boy such as Jack, who could not wait to serve his country, I guess it's not difficult to see how that would have happened. He was a cheeky chappie, fun-loving chappie. From what I gather, he could outshoot even the most experienced of riflemen in his training days. He grew up full of adventure from the tales of his grandfather. So the burning desire to leave England to go and serve his country, nothing would stop him. So I can kind of understand how he got over, but it still will puzzle quite a few people watching this video, and I can see why. But like I said, a strong-willed young boy couldn't wait to get over and couldn't wait to serve his country. I guess it wouldn't have been that difficult for Jack to blag his way throughout his training, throughout actually getting over to Normandy. But let's be honest, once he's on that actual boat itself, and or if he's in them planes, however he got over to France, once he's there, isn't he? Nobody's going to question anymore his age, his details. He's a soldier, he's a private fighting for war, fighting for the country. So yeah, I can kind of guess why some people will be bemused as to how he managed to do it, but he did it, and the poor lad suffered the ultimate consequences of his actions. Now, that is all from here at Darwen Cemetery, and we do hope you've enjoyed this tale, this story on the courageousness of young Jack Banks. Still disappointed that there's nothing here to remember that poor lad. but hopefully that will come in the near future. But if you did enjoy this story, please don't forget to comment down below. Have you heard the story of Jack Banks? Perhaps you're a relative, a family member. What are your thoughts and feelings on young Jack, and how proud you must be of what he did? Comment down below, tell us your thoughts. Now in the meantime, I'm going to leave Darwen Cemetery. We're going to shoot off to another location as we always do, but we want you to take care, look after yourselves. Don't forget to give us a big thumbs up. Don't forget to share this video because it does help the channel, and the more people that know about people such as young Jack, I think the better, because it keeps their memory alive. But in the meantime guys, I want you to take care, look after yourselves, and myself and Vicky will be back soon with other tales from a dark but at times glorious past. Stay safe, stay curious.
In the street, flags and flowers and singing for the home-come heroes treat. I sat in the kitchen without a fire on the range. I knew this house had lost the cause to ever make me warm again. Come back to me, days are all too long. Come